Hello, everybody. Ben Rogers here, the Raptors Digest. Ryker, there hasn't been much basketball going on recently, but the one thing that's been keeping everybody sane is the Jordan documentary that's been released on Netflix. There's another couple episodes dropping tonight, Sunday night, so it's something that people have been keeping their eyes on. But one thing that we noticed, Ryker, was Michael Jordan's co-star, Scottie Pippen, was almost traded during that season to the Toronto Raptors for a guy that ended up being a multi-time All-Star, Tracy McGrady, but he was not that for the Toronto Raptors. So this really puts an interesting hypothetical in front of Raptors fans looking back at what could have happened if this trade ended up going through.
Ben, there's a lot of ways that you can take this, because this could have turned into bringing in or trading DeMar DeRozan for Kawhi Leonard, or it could have turned into what I'd imagine it would pan out to be if anybody in the NBA traded for Draymond Green. It could be an absolute win or an absolute disaster, Ben.
Yeah, no, it would have been ridiculous. So we'll just put some context around this, taking a look at the player stats, because it's a long time ago. You always think of these players, you hear names like Tracy McGrady, Scottie Pippen, you think of them at their peaks, but this was going to be during the 1997 NBA draft, and at this point in time, these players weren't. Scottie still was going to win a championship with the Chicago Bulls and had an amazing year that year, but he was towards the twilight of his career. His averages that year were
they were in the 20s. They were in the 20s for points, but basically once he went to Houston, the subsequent years in Portland, you're looking at his productivity slip down into a little bit unprecedented in his career, like 14-point range, 12, 11, 10, 10, and then 6 points to finish it off. So you're absolutely right. He's at the end of his career, but he's still a guy with celebrity status, I guess, amongst the NBA. Very serviceable player, big-time all-star, and you'd maybe be bringing him into a Raptors team that you don't have, in that 97-98 season, you don't have any big shots, you don't have any big salary guys. So really, Ben, how would you feel like what would his impact be? Right? What would it mean to bring in Scottie Pippen? Whether or not he gives you 20 points per game, or for some reason he came in and was more productive than he would have been on Houston or Portland.
Yeah, well, I have the numbers here now. Just this year with the Chicago Bulls, he averaged 19 points per game, obviously came back from that injury and stuff, and they ended up winning a championship. So he was still on his peak Bulls, winning an NBA championship. So I definitely agree. He would have been that star power, he definitely would have had a significant impact, and a lot greater impact than a guy like Tracy McGrady that season in particular, and really compared to any season Tracy McGrady had with us as a franchise, because Tracy only averaged in his this 97-98 season, he only averaged 7 points and 4 rebounds. Didn't get that much minutes, 18 minutes. The next year, 9 points. The year after, 15. And it wasn't till he went to Orlando that we really saw the Tracy McGrady. And he was only 21, 18, 19, and 20 when he played for the Raptors. But once the first year in Orlando, he ended up averaging 27 points per game. So Tracy really never had the impact for the Toronto Raptors that obviously we would have liked to reap the benefits of. And he ended up leaving. We ended up getting nothing for him. So there's no real value added in having Tracy McGrady on this roster. So the insertion of Scottie Pippen is only really positive, I'd say, for this Toronto Raptors team, even though, as you mentioned, he wasn't peak Scottie Pippen, but he could still play defense, he could still get buckets, and again, he's a guy that would be coming off at this point 5 NBA championships, so that experience certainly would have helped.
Well, of course, you always want a veteran in the locker room, and it's ironic. I mean, it is pretty funny that you go from potentially having this trade piece undrafted so far to flip him into a Hall of Famer in Scottie Pippen, who might have one more championship spurt left in his tank before he turns into just an average good player in the NBA on a super high contract. Right, that's what he got at the end of his career. What ultimately ended up turning, exactly as you said, Tracy McGrady leaving and getting a 2005 draft pick. So it is unfortunate that Michael Jordan, I guess, stepped in to veto that trade, because we'll go on with the underlying assumption that everything else would have remained the same, given Raptors kind of would have had the salary flexibility. You're not paying out your big guys. We can go into what their salaries were. But Ben, the next scenario that we're going to step this into is just assuming that we get him, assuming we're going to pay him the equal salary or the equal contract that he would have gotten otherwise, assuming we're still going to draft Vince Carter, assuming the rest of the roster will pretty much look the same. the Toronto Raptors, they had success in that 2000-2001 season. What would that have looked like then with Scottie Pippen on the team?
Yeah, and that's a lot of points that you brought up there, because it wasn't until this trade would have happened in the 1997 draft. So that you're going to the 97-98 season, and Vince Carter was not on this team yet when this trade would have happened. So obviously the draft predictions likely would have shifted, but that would have been, and we'll address this, I think, before we get into that. That would have probably been the most catastrophic thing to happen if we didn't draft Vince Carter, because he was the guy that really carried the franchise through the first few seasons, or for the that playoff run that we're going to address coming up. So if bringing in Scottie Pippen and then we have to pay him big money and he doesn't have the same sort of production, I think that would have been a huge negative, and something that we do have to address and take into account, because the rest of that roster wasn't really nice. Maybe he keeps a guy like Damon Stoudemire or some of these other players. Like the roster in 1997, we had Chauncey Billups on the roster, but he was playing behind Stoudemire, and not any other big names. Doug Christie was another guy that played well, but Scottie would have probably gotten eaten into his time. So,
but that's just it, Ben. Why would it be a bad thing if you gave Scottie Pippen a 4-year contract, big money, and he ends up not being great? I mean, you just said there's only one big name, and it's Damon Stoudemire, and he's not even a big name. I'm sure anybody outside the Raptors sphere might not even be extremely familiar with his work in the NBA.
He was great for the Raptors, though.
Yeah, for the Raptors.
In his rookie, he averaged, because assuming Scottie's a big enough name to keep Damon Stoudemire around, that he averaged like 19 and 10, 19 and 9 for us in his tenure with the Raptors.
Yeah, so why would it be a bad thing if we paid out Scottie Pippen and he was not good? Because if he was not good, then you're still going to draft Vince Carter, or better. Right? Like the team was not good with Tracy McGrady, and then they ended up going along and being fine. They never really paid anybody out. If you paid Scottie Pippen out and he's bad, wouldn't that be the most likely scenario, that everything would have been the exact same as it was, except for you also have Scottie Pippen on that roster?
No, I'm saying we're a little bit better, so we don't draft Vince Carter, and then he ends up, because he still had a good year that season, so he definitely would have helped us in that 97 season that we did poorly and ended up getting Vince Carter in the draft. But I'm saying the catastrophic scenario, but I'm in agreement. I think this would have been a good outcome for the Raptors. But the catastrophic scenario is that we don't get Vince Carter in the next year.
Oh, and that's just good enough that we miss out, but he's still, okay. I got what you're saying.
Yeah, so that would be the tough situation. But we're going to go forward, because no one really remembers the 97-98 season, and looking back at Raptors history, and the year that we really look back on now in 2020, and we think of that 2000-2001 year where the Raptors ended up making to the Eastern Conference semifinals, and they ended up facing off against Allen Iverson in the sort of semifinals, and everyone remembers AI's team ended up getting to the finals, took one game off Kobe and Shaq, did that walkover on Ty Lue, I believe that was in that series. So the Raptors, but people, NBA fans, not Raptors fans, forget, we took that team to 7. Vince Carter had one shot to really win it. It was the day of Vince going to his college graduation, came back and missed the shot, but neither here or there. But if we had Scottie Pippen just insert it into that team, because obviously Trace, he has definitely more playoff experience and all that at that point, definitely would have been a much more valuable asset, with his experience, his defensive ability to pair alongside Vince Carter during one of those playoff runs. Maybe we win that series if we have Scottie Pippen on that team, assuming we have Vince Carter in this similar roster.
Well, it's plausible. I think that's a fun situation to run, to say, right? You're bringing a team that went to the championship to 7 games. You're bringing in an already proven veteran Hall of Famer defensive specialist. You're adding in, he knows he'll be a complimentary piece. He's not going to be the guy. You're still letting Vince Carter go out and do his thing to be the man, right? And salaries would still work out. If you're paying him, again, that big salary, you lock him in for 4 or 5 years. Hypothetically, he would be there. Well, who was the biggest contract you said, or what was the biggest value on that team, Ben? That
$5 million.
$5 million. So there's at least 63 players that season, because I'm looking down, number 63, Kendall Gill of New Jersey is getting paid $7 million. So I mean, unless they have just this absurd salary cap compared to the rest of the league, which they might have, given they were still recently an expansion team.
Yep.
You're able to pay him that money, and really all you're doing is just adding in, like you'd still have the same roster, you'd assume, right? Like the roster would be the exact same. I think there's no reason to imagine that they wouldn't be able to get one step past the 76ers, right? I don't think that would make them a championship team against that Lakers team, but what would that's a fun situation to think of.
Well, if the Raptors make the finals that year, because during this time, everything was really peachy with the Toronto Raptors. Everything looked really good. Vince Carter ended up, I'm not sure if it was after this year, I believe it was after this 2001 season, he ended up signing a huge extension with the team, saying this is where he wanted to be, and all that stuff was occurring, and the team looked like it was a really strong roster, and maybe that just gets amplified. Maybe the load is less on Vince Carter playing the wing, having to dominate that position, that those injuries don't occur the years after, and then following that season, the Toronto Raptors basically collapsed. Vince ended up getting injured seemingly every year. Then people were going at him in the media, and then Vince started going on saying he wasn't going to dunk anymore, and then demanded a trade, and then we all know how that ended up playing out. People were booing him in Toronto for 10, 12, 15 years. So it was really after that season that the Raptors turned into the team that we kind of remember for the most part of yours and both of our childhoods, where we really struggled to make the playoffs and all that sort of stuff happen. But if we have a presence like Scottie Pippen to sort of calm everything down, have the franchise run like something professional, like a championship-oriented franchise, maybe that load is less on Vince Carter. Maybe there's more respect for the players that they managed because it was the team and Vince that really messed up that whole situation. Maybe Scottie Pippen as a calming presence just totally shifts the trajectory of the Raptors franchise with Vince Carter, and Scottie knows how to play with a star shooting guard, as we've seen in his 6 championships and through this documentary.
Begrudgingly. But Ben, we also like to bring in Hall of Famers. We would have had potentially Scottie Pippen and Hakeem Olajuwon together on the same Toronto Raptors roster with Vince Carter.
Just like that Rockets team.
Right. Well, exactly. Yeah. So this is what I'm going to say. This is what I'm going to ask to you is, had it happened in 2000 rather than 2019, that the Raptors made it to the NBA Finals, and you have a bona fide Hall of Famer on your team, Scottie Pippen. He's proven himself that he's able to be on a championship roster, not only in a team as stacked as the Bulls with Michael Jordan and Dennis Rodman, Steve Kerr. There's a lot of speculation about how far do complementary pieces go and how much can they stand on their own. He proves that he makes it to the finals on 2 teams. Vince Carter's happy he makes it to the finals. Let's just say injuries maybe weren't as prevalent. Let's just say everything was good. Like you said, it's peachy in Raptors world. Does this make it at the start of 2000? Would they have been able to stretch that into something completely different, right? Whether or not Vince Carter gets injured and leaves, would it have become instantly a more desirable place for free agents if they see, wow, you got some certified stars, some certified veterans on this team. They're saying they like Toronto Raptors. They're a good franchise. They're able to turn around this quickly and have success. Would it have completely changed everything? Like, would we have landed people in free agency, or would we still have to play the, acquire via draft game and develop our stars and do a bunch of weird stuff and look over to Europe? Like, would that have still been the path for the Toronto Raptors?
I think the factor of respect, I don't think we become a destination like the LA Lakers or Miami Heat or something like that, but I think the respect factor, and because during seemingly all of the 2000s until Masai Ujiri, it feels like the Toronto Raptors had this label of stars don't want to play there. People don't want to play in Canada. We saw it with the Grizzlies and we saw it with the Toronto Raptors. We saw, Damien Stoudemire, who was averaging ridiculous stats, 20-9 for the team. He ended up demanding a trade, or wanting out of Toronto, ended up going to Portland, I believe, and really didn't have the stats and didn't have the success over in Portland that he had with the Toronto Raptors. We saw Vince leave. We saw just seemingly every name that came to Toronto want to leave. And I think the franchise itself, and I brought up the Vancouver Grizzlies. They had like Steve Francis, who refused to play there, and different guys. I think if the Toronto Raptors make the finals, have a positive outcome with Scottie Pippen and Vince Carter, and they don't sort of flounder that situation, if they can keep Scottie Pippen happy and keep having success with this sort of team, I don't think that perception that the Toronto Raptors are a weak franchise or a destination no one wants to play in, I think that disappears. I think we become similar to obviously we wouldn't have nearly the history as the Celtics or the Sixers or something like that, but we become sort of a destination in that aspect where it's still cold. It's not going to be a place where your wife is going to look at and say, oh, it's 30 odd degrees there every day, so I'm gonna try and stay. But it's a place where it's respectable to go and build up your franchise, and I think we would have had a lot more success over that decade, and the pre-Masai Ujiri days would have been a lot better in Raptors land.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's just a fun mental exercise to play through that whole what if scenario, because I think realistically, again, if you had obtained through a trade of Tracy McGrady on that 97 draft day for Scottie Pippen, you're not getting a guy that's going to come in and be the man. You're probably, I would put money on it, you're 99% likely to get that same Scottie Pippen that played out the end of his career, averaging 10 to 14 points, basically. I think that's the guy that you're getting. But if you're, everything considered, what happened over the next 4 or 5 years for the Toronto Raptors without Scottie Pippen would have been, I think, no different than having Scottie Pippen there, because he would have only been marginally better on any given roster, or would have only improved marginally any given roster. They didn't max out any trade or any salary guys anyways, and you have a year where you made a good playoff run, and he would have no doubt increased their chances in winning that Game 7. So I think it's one that, it's unfortunate they couldn't have made a deal work, or I guess it really came down to Michael Jordan in the end. He was the yes or no guy, but I think it would have improved this Raptors fate, and unfortunately they had to just wait 10 more years to really get a good run at it.
10. It took us 19 years to win, overnight, like 22 years from 1997 to win a chip, Riker.
Yeah, true. I was thinking 2010. I forgot. 1997. I guess 22 years. 22 years to figure it all out.
Yeah, but we did it. We figured it out, and thankfully we got it at our peak Raptor watching experience, because you and I wouldn't have been able to witness we would have been very, very young if the Raptors ended up winning or going to the finals. At least we weren't beating that Shaq and Kobe Lakers team with the Scottie Pippen on the roster. But Riker, the one thing I guess I'll throw at you before we end this podcast is, I know you're saving the sort of the watching experience of the Bulls documentary to when there's more episodes out, so you can binge it and all that. But it's knowledge out there that Jordan wanted Scottie Pippen on the team. He wanted Phil Jackson there. But let's just say this trade happens. Does Michael Jordan demand a trade to the Toronto Raptors and bring Phil Jackson along and win 3 or 4 championships in the early 2000s in Canada for Toronto? Does that situation have a possibility at happening?
For Scottie Pippen, all he wants is a more reasonable parity for his contract. He wants to get out under the shadow of Michael Jordan. He finally escapes him as far as he can north of the border, and then have Michael Jordan and the same coach follow him up. I don't know. I think it would have drove him insane, but of course, we see what the Raptors can do when we get in one certified top 5 player in the league. We turn that into a championship year. So, of course, Ben, that would have happened.
Easy money. And you haven't watched it, but he's not mad at Michael Jordan in the documentary. It's the GM that they go at. So he might be happy. Everyone might be more peachy in Toronto with Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, maybe bring in a Vince too, bring in the whole squad, bring the whole band together and win 10 straight championships, and then bring in Kawhi in the future and win 10 straight more. 10 more straight.
Yeah. Sure.
Well, yeah, you guys heard it here first. The Raptors would have won 20 straight championships with Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan if this trade ended up going down. But realistically, what do you guys think would have occurred? Do you think the Raptors would have been better off making this trade if it fell through, or just letting it go by the wayside and seeing how things happened with Tracy McGrady ended up leaving? Let us know in the comment section below. You're the best for making this far. Check out the Twitter, the Instagram, all that cool stuff. You have any last words, Riker?
That's it for me, Ben. Cheers.